Chapter 8. Tuck usually spent Sundays with Hannah and her family in church and around Hannah's father's place. Today, however, apologies had to be made because of the late-breaking news that had the WLIB News reporting the animal attack at Millie Frakes with video on the 11 o'clock news. Now the main office was fit to be tied, and everyone from the mayor of Myrtle Beach down was screaming bloody murder about what bad publicity this was for the area. Bob and Tuck were being called to the Florence office for a 10 a.m. meeting with the DNR heads, including Colonel Mears, their commander. When Tuck arrived at Bob Pike's house, Abby and Bob were on the porch saying goodbye to each other. Tuck waved a greeting to Abby as Bob got into the truck. "What's going on, Bob?" Tuck asked with an unsettled feeling in his gut. "For starters, the hair sample that you picked up belonged to a cougar, as did the teeth marks in both Val's rib cage and poor old Miley Frakes' head. Apparently this was a very large cat, even for a cougar," Bob answered. "The department biologists are having a hissy fit because there are not supposed to be any of those around here. Now it seems as if we're being placed in a bad light because not only have we not controlled those damn coyotes, we also don't know about a big cougar in our own backyard. The colonel wants a plan by the time this meeting adjourns for capturing or killing this cat, and I haven't got a clue how to go about it." Bob sounded exasperated as he explained the situation to Tuck. Tuck's phone rang before he could answer Bob. "Officer Tucker, this is Johnny Faraday. I took the hunter safety course from you last fall." "I remember, Johnny. What do you need?" Tuck was uncharacteristically short with the boy and immediately felt bad about it. "I'm out here by Russ Lake off of Woodbury Road to set up my stands for the opener next week, and I've found something funny," said Johnny. "What do you mean by funny?" Tuck responded. "There are 2 hogs down here covered with leaves and stinking to high heaven. They're cut up real bad, too." Tuck's immediate response was, "Johnny, get out of there slowly right now. Don't turn your back on the hogs." As he waited for a reply, Tuck heard the boy scream and then a deep snarl as he was attacked. "Bob, get on the phone to someone and see if they can get us a GPS trace on this phone," showing the number to his partner. "That damn cat just killed the Faraday kid over in the Woodbury WMA. He shouted as he spun the big Ford around and headed for the WMA entrance on Highway 378. While Bob called the attack in, Tuck called the sheriff's department to get a helicopter airborne and en route to the vicinity. The heavy foliage was going to make it difficult to see into the swamp, but it might run the cat off of the kid. It took almost 10 minutes to get a fix on the cell phone location, which put it smack in the middle of the swamp near Russ Lake. Tuck decided to take the PD highway, which paralleled the river, and see how close they could get to the attack site. "Can we get a boat to meet us at the end of Punch Bowl Road?" Tuck asked Bob. "We can try," was the response, as Bob called for one of the other DNR officers to bring a shallow draft runabout over to the landing. Fortunately, Earl Johnson, one of the fellows that Bob went to church with, had heard the emergency call on his scanner and called Bob to volunteer his services. He was on Kates Bay Road, only about 10 minutes from the Punch Bowl Road landing, and would have a boat in the water when they arrived. Earl had launched his bass boat and was parked in the trailer when the 2 men arrived. Tuck grabbed his shotgun from behind the seat and headed at a dead run for the boat with Bob on his heels. Earl was there in seconds, and as he boarded the boat, Bob and Tuck asked simultaneously, "Earl, what in the world have you got on your feet?" Earl gave them a big grin as he lifted his right foot to show off the new cheap canvas boat shoes that were a checkerboard pattern of electric blue and black. "I found these over at Save Mart for $5, Earl replied with a grin as he stepped into the boat. "When I wore them out fishing a couple of weeks ago, I had the best day that I've ever had, so I went back and brought 3 more pair. Snazzy, huh? They are now my lucky fishing shoes." Earl hit the ignition and the big 150-horse outboard roared to life. "Where to?" yelled Earl over the engine noise. "Russ Lake, Earl, if we can get there with this rig. The water is low," Tuck responded. Bob turned to Earl and said, "Keep it on top, Earl. We need to get there yesterday." Earl grinned as he pushed the throttle forward, and the boat jumped like a horse eager to run. Earl knew the little PD like the back of his hand and wasn't afraid to run at top speed to get to the boy that was in trouble, and probably dead. "Wahoo! Let the big dog eat," he shouted as the boat planed out and flew down the shallow river at speeds approaching 70 miles an hour. They navigated the many turns of the little PD at full speed where possible and came to the cut through to Russ Lake about 10 minutes after leaving the landing. The helicopter was on station when they arrived and radioed that they were on top of the cell phone coordinates, but could see nothing. "Great," thought Tuck. "We're going to have to slog about 200 yards of swamp bottom to get over to Woodbury Road." Then to Earl, "Take us to the southwest end, Earl. We'll have a truck meet us when we get there." "Sure thing, fellas. Glad to help," Earl said as he killed the motor and raised it clear of the bottom in the shallow water. Taking his push pole, Earl eased the boat into the cypress knees as far as he could. Tuck and Bob shouldered their gear and got out of the boat onto a relatively dry hummock, then made a double-time run through the swamp to a small dirt path off of Woodbury Road where a sheriff's deputy waited for them in his four-wheel drive Ford. "We've got a location about a mile up the road, and I think that we can get the truck in most of the way," he shouted in a way of greeting. "Let's go," Bob said as he got in the truck. Tuck took the door with a shotgun just in case they had to get out in a hurry. When they got to the area that the chopper had hovered over, they waved the pilot off so he could sit down in an open area about 200 yards away beside a field that had been planted with pine. Tuck checked the round in the chamber of the 12-gauge shotgun, and they proceeded to look around for the Faraday boy. It wasn't long before they found the two hogs partially buried in the leaves, and right between was the cell phone still open. There were also signs of a struggle and drag marks heading toward the lake through the bottom, heavily covered with cypress and oak. Bob and the deputy each drew their issue 9mm Glocks, and Tuck took the lead with the shotgun at the ready. They'd gone about 50 feet when Tuck caught a glimpse of Johnny's boots in some marsh grass directly ahead. He went into a crouch to look under the surrounding scrub brush for the cat, but it wasn't near the body. Tuck motioned the others to follow and then moved quickly to Johnny Faraday's side. The boy's scalp was torn loose from his head and hung over his face, and there were bite marks on his arms and hands like he'd tried to defend himself. As Tuck lifted the scalp back from the face and more into position on Johnny's head, he heard a brief, low moan come from the boy's lips. "He's alive!" Tuck shouted. "Thank God he's alive!" The deputy was already on the radio for the chopper to be on standby, as Bob and Tuck made certain there were not any broken bones, then gently lifted the boy by his underarms and started carrying him to the helicopter for medevac. The deputy ran to the helicopter to retrieve a covered stretcher that they could put Johnny in once they were clear of the swamp bottom. Once Johnny was loaded up and the helicopter was airborne, Bob placed a call to the Florence office and talked directly to the colonel to update the situation. "No, sir, we haven't seen what attacked him." "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand, sir," was all that Tuck heard as he went back to the spot where the cougar had left the boy. There was no visible sign to positively identify the animal, so Tuck went down to the lake on a hunch. There in the damp mud of the cypress swamp was what he'd been looking for, a full set of tracks belonging to a very big cat, with water still filling the depression. "Over here, Bob," he called to his partner. "Look at this." Bob came to Tuck and whistled softly. "Those paws are over 6 inches wide, Tuck, and it looks like he's favoring one leg." Tuck took pictures with his cell phone while noting that the stride was over 9 feet, making this one of the biggest cougars that he'd ever heard of. "What did the colonel say, Bob?" "Well, he's none too happy about having to cancel the meeting, but finding that boy alive sure saves us a lot of face, so it's going to be all right. He's on the way down with a couple of biologists and will meet us back in Conway when we wrap up here. That cat is near the lake and the swamp, so it's unlikely that we'll be able to flush him today. We need someone with experience and a pack of dogs to bring this big boy in. I say we get the deputy to take us back to the truck, and then we can make a few plans on the way to see the colonel." "I'd feel better if we came up with a solution before he did anyway," Tuck replied, then with a chuckle. "Look on the bright side. You'd never see that red-haired lady reporter from WLIB out here asking questions, especially if she saw one of those," pointing to a 10-foot long alligator that swam quietly in the dark water of Ross Lake.